It's been a hot minute since I've made one of these videos, and well, things are a little uncertain at the moment. 2020 has really been a kick in the dick as far as years go, and people thought 2016 was bad? Girl, please. With a dark and grim present turning into an even darker future, I thought now would be a good time to follow up on my last video, where we talked about The Laughing Man. The last time we went over this in kind of broad strokes, but we talked about the actual plot of the first season of Ghost in the Shell that centered around The Laughing Man. If you need a quick reference of that, a link will be down in the description, the first link right there, or it should be kind of showing up about now. Now, to put it simply, The Laughing Man set out to expose a mess of corruption regarding the micromachines industry and the suppression of the Mirai vaccine, a vaccine that would prove effective in treating cyberbrain sclerosis, a debilitating disease that was affecting the cyberbrains of the citizens of 2019 Japan, in Ghost in the Shell, not in real life. The Laughing Man set out to expose this truth to the world and really expose the phonies that were trying to hide said truth. That really brings us into this next point, where we'll be talking more about the thematic identity of the Laughing Man. Now, to do this, we'll be taking a step back from plot and examine two key figures, one literary and one anime, and just really asking the question, how is Aoi, aka the Laughing Man, like Holden Caulfield? Now, before we dive right into the character, we first need to recognize the man behind the references. The first season of Ghost in the Shell is one long love letter to J.D. Salinger, not only in reference, but in theme as well, which we'll be going over in this video, but we're going to begin at the first and most notable reference in all of Ghost in the Shell. The spinning text of the Laughing Man logo, as most fans would know, is, "I thought what I'd do was, I'd pretend I was one of those deaf mutes." It's a direct quote from Catcher in the Rye. And there's actually more to that quote. The full quote reads, "I thought what I'd do was, I'd pretend I was one of those deaf mutes. That way, I wouldn't have to have any goddamn stupid, useless conversations with anybody. If anybody wanted to tell me something, they'd have to write it on a piece of paper and shove it over to me. They'd get bored as hell doing that, and after a while, and then I'd be through with having conversations for the rest of my life." Now, looking at this full quote, your initial reaction might be, "Oh my god, so much angst." And you would be partially correct. This is a quote said by one Holden Caulfield, the main character and narrator of J.D. Salinger's greatest work, The Catcher in the Rye. The novel is about Holden and his journey back home after being expelled from boarding school one fateful winter. Throughout the novel, Holden's biggest desire is for someone to listen to him while he talks about his fears of growing up. And really, I can't blame the kid. I mean, in the novel, he's 16 and already has gray hair. A tough break, kid. I lost my hair in college. Holden Caulfield is a character of many wants and desires, but is consumed with frustrations due to his inability to relate to people or have people take him seriously enough to listen. This full quote, "I thought what I'd do is I'd pretend to be one of those deaf mutes," is Holden throwing his hands up and just really giving up on the idea of having conversations altogether. Instead of talking or seeking people out, he would rather shut himself away and have people come to him if they want to converse with him. Now, due to his age, Holden feels he really doesn't have a lot of control over his life. In fact, kids rarely do at that age. In that regard, the one thing he does have complete control over in this moment is his agency. Who he talks to and how he communicates with others is entirely up to him, and that really goes for the same for all kids that are of his age. Both Holden and Aoi are complex characters who share similar desires and motivations, but due to the nature of their media, express it in different ways. If I may play armchair English teacher for a moment, The Catcher in the Rye itself, as a novel, is in a unique position, because to this day, as of writing this script, it has not been made into a movie. This novel has continued to remain relevant in schools and institutions, while having no screenplay adaptation in our movie-obsessed world. Even the novel itself makes this kind of reference when Holden calls his brother a prostitute for having given up on novels and moving to Hollywood to write screenplays. But what does this obsession with language and disdain for movies really mean for Holden? Well, it means that when it comes to interpreting Holden's language, we really only have the written text to go off of. And Holden doesn't really want us to get too close for comfort. Catcher in the Rye is drenched in passive voice, the bane of any writer in today's world. Now, normally, passive voice separates the writer from the reader. It kind of creates a barrier of sorts that prevents the reader from connecting to the characters or the written text. However, Salinger's use of the passive voice helps characterize Holden in such an effective way. To demonstrate this, let's look at one of my favorite quotes in the entire novel. My brother Ollie had this left-handed fielder's mitt. He was left-handed. The thing that was descriptive about it, though, was that it had poems written all over the fingers and the pockets and everywhere, in green ink. He wrote them on it so that he'd have something to read when he was in the field and nobody was up to bat. He's dead now. That abrupt shift to the present tense gives this passage its punch, and it gives the reader a good taste of what is to come so far as Holden's language is concerned. Holden's voice is inseparable from the novel. I mean, it makes sense that he is the narrator after all, and he is talking to us, the reader. This all tracks. But what is perhaps the most meta aspect about Catcher is the fact that the novel is written as a framing device by a 19-year-old Holden. The events of the novel, the actual events that take place, is when Holden is 16. But 19-year-old Holden is telling us about the time that he was 16 years old and was expelled from boarding school. During this time, all he wanted to do was talk and have somebody hear him, have somebody reassure him about the uncertainties of growing up and really to listen to him. By reading Catcher in the Rye, we are fulfilling Holden's desire to be heard in the first place. Whack. That is the magic of a reading, ladies and gentlemen. It is an active exercise in digesting media. The information is not given to us through images that pass over a screen. They are words that not only have to be read, but also interpreted. Should people read more books? Absolutely. Are they going to? Absolutely not. There's way too much good anime and streaming services out there for both personal use and also for new videos. I personally, I'll try my best. These differences also separate Holden from the Laughing Man. Holden gets his message across to us from the language in Catcher in the Rye, a novel with an almost stubborn refusal to be interpreted in any other way. Meanwhile, the Laughing Man has his message and influence freely given through the media to a point where the iconography and influences of the logo get away from him. We have to go to Holden. Owie comes to us. But Zach, you big bald bastard, I hear you asking. What does this English 101 lesson have to do with Ghost in the Shell? Reading is dumb and also for girls. To that I say two things. One, true. And second, I hope you were taking notes. This will be on the test. With this new context, we begin to piece together just who the Laughing Man really is. Just like Holden Caulfield, Owie, the Laughing Man, is uninterested in the materialistic, phony world around him. For Holden, it was a complicated yet necessary phase in growing up. He was afraid of growing up in a world that he didn't see as valid and attempted to distance himself from it. He flirts with the idea of giving up on conversations altogether because he doesn't see any other way of reconciling his frustrations. However, the Laughing Man, while similar, had a world to escape from and communicate with others on his terms. The virtual world. In the facility where we first meet the Laughing Man physically, patients there are suffering from a disease called cyberbrain closed shell syndrome. People who suffer from this disease basically have an aggressive form of autism where they shut themselves off away from the physical world and can't cope, and can only really flourish in cyberspace. Owie was part of that facility, and like Holden, he dissociates with a society he neither doesn't want to be a part of, or doesn't understand him. This is why he appears to Togusa as a deaf mute. The people inside this facility have either rejected or cannot function in the physical world, but excel at communication in cyberspace, and can talk amongst themselves and others in the space of their own creation. As we discussed in the previous video, the Laughing Man found out about the corruption that was going on with Serrano Genomics and the macromachines industry completely by accident while in cyberspace. Of course, the news that a major corporation is suppressing an effective vaccine for cyberbrain sclerosis in pursuit of major profits would be more than a little irritating for somebody that is suffering from said disease. Something had to be done. So the plan was simple. Get the info out of Mr. Serrano so that He could help expose the truth to the world. When Aoi saw that there was a live broadcast on that particular day, he improvised. Whatever plan he had was thrown out the window when he pushed Mr. Serrano in front of that live broadcast and tried to make him confess to the truth. Was it perhaps to look dramatic? Was it just the quickest way to get the truth out? We'll never really know. However, this is where the similarities between Aoi and Holden become clear, where Holden wants someone to listen to him. Aoi, the laughing man, wants someone to hear the truth. Now, it's quick, but I think this line really tells you just what this is all about.
Not right now. Why don't you tell him? Go ahead. It wouldn't mean anything.
It wouldn't mean anything. Now, it seems pretty obvious at first, of course. If Aoi comes out with the truth on his own, no one would believe him on face value. They just dismiss it as a rumor. He needed Mr. Serrano to tell the truth for it to be credible. However, what the Laughing Man and everyone else really failed to realize is he never needed to. His message would be picked up just by him showing himself and exposing his message an icon to the world. The world the Laughing Man occupies is one saturated by media. People can interact with media in limitless varieties. Jacking into the net directly allows people to consume their media on levels that novels could only dream of. So looking back on Aoi's throwaway line, it rings even more true. It wouldn't mean anything. Even if Aoi didn't intend for things to go this way, his message would be carried in a way that resonated with people and would take root in something bigger than any individual. What Aoi and Holden Caulfield have in common is something called Memetic power. Now, for the sake of this video, I will be referring to the textbook definition of a meme, which is an element of culture or system of behavior that may be considered to be passed from one individual to another by non-genetic means, especially imitation. Holden Caulfield became one of the greatest literary figures in American literature when we got around to hearing his story. He knew who he was, his ideas are kept in the written world, and we only have JD's word to go by when it comes to Holden. In the novel, Holden refers to adults and the world they occupy as phony. To a lot of literary people, the word phony has become sort of a meme. This element of getting rid of all the phonies came about with the success of Catcher in the Rye. Hell, it even comes up in Ghost in the Shell a few times. Now, Holden didn't come up with the word phony, but the usage of the word did increase post-Catcher. And while the use of the word phony can't be 100% contributed to the novel, the ideas expressed within and Holden's desire to get rid of said phonies did influence our language in a not insignificant way. All too often we have seen the effects of media on individuals. In Catcher's lifetime, 3 individual shootings have been associated with the novel, the most famous of which was the murder of John Lennon. His killer, Mark David Chapman, was inspired by Holden, and even wrote in his copy of Catcher, "This is my statement," and signed it, Holden Caulfield. The incident left its mark on American history. Not only was John Lennon killed, but Catcher in the Rye was forever labeled as the book that inspired this senseless killing. Now, it is safe to say, Ghost in the Shell has not caused any shootings to occur in real life. However, there was an event in Season 1 that demonstrates the Laughing Man's memetic power. Oddly enough, it's in a title episode, Meme. After the Laughing Man incident, fans and copycats alike started to adopt the logo as part of their counterculture persona. Despite any and all attempts to expose the truth and share his message, the masses adopted this initial act of corporate terrorism into a pop culture icon. From music, to movies, to clothing, this single individual's message has been turned into a meme. And while a lot of people saw the Laughing Man logo as just a trend and a meme, there was real power behind that little blue face. During the episode entitled Meme, an assassination attempt is made on the Superintendent General of Japan, but not just from one person. During the episode, multiple attempts are made on the government official's life, all while different people are claiming to be the Laughing Man. Each assassin has some sort of paraphernalia linked to the Laughing Man logo, and after being interrogated, the individuals all claim that they came of their own accord without meeting up with anyone previously. It is here where Ghost in the Shell actually does get its namesake. These individuals all came together, responding to the same stimuli, but not each other. They were all a standalone complex. It should go without saying that the Laughing Man and Holden Caulfield have more in common than memetic power. These two share a common desire to be heard and get that message across in their own various medias. By studying Holden, we understand more about the identity of the Laughing Man. The first season of Ghost in the Shell takes more than just a referential inspiration from J.D. Salinger's work. Instead, it takes the idea of communication and even the meta influences of Catcher and applies them to a rich, dystopian, cyberpunk world.